A Marine sat freezing in the snow, his hands shaking as he gave his last piece of food to his starving canine. The dog ate. He didn't. He just sat there, staring at nothing, like he had already lost everything that mattered. People walked past, some slowed down, some whispered, but no one stopped. Because a man like him was easier to ignore than to understand. Until a 93-year-old woman stepped out of the diner, walked straight up to him, and sat down like he wasn't invisible. And what she said next didn't just help him, it changed the direction of a life he thought was already over. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Snow fell in slow, silent sheets across the empty parking lot, muting the world into something distant and unreal. Staff Sergeant Marcus Hale sat with his back pressed firmly against the cold brick wall of the diner, positioned where he could see both the entrance and the road beyond. Even now, years after leaving the United States Marine Corps, the habit hadn't left him. It never would. Marcus Hale was 38 years old, tall, with a once powerful build now worn down by months, maybe years, of neglect. His shoulders still carried the structure of a trained soldier, broad and disciplined, but there was a visible slackness in the way he held himself, as if the weight inside him had slowly hollowed everything out. His dark brown hair was cropped short in a military style, though uneven now, like he had cut it himself without a mirror. A rough stubble covered his jaw, not thick enough to be a beard, but enough to show he had stopped caring about appearances. His skin was weathered, pale under the winter light, with faint scars along his cheekbone and near his temple, small reminders of things he never talked about. His eyes were the part people noticed most if they dared to look long enough. Sharp, always moving, always scanning. But behind that sharpness was something else, something fractured. A constant tension lived there, like a man bracing for something that never stopped coming. Beside him lay Shadow, a 5-year-old German Shepherd canine with amber-toned fur dulled by dirt and snow. The dog's ribs were faintly visible beneath his coat, his once powerful frame now leaned to the point of concern. But there was nothing weak in the way Shadow held himself. His ears were upright, alert, his gaze constantly shifting between Marcus and the surroundings. His breathing was steady, controlled, visible in soft bursts of white against the cold air. Shadow had the posture of a trained working dog, disciplined and loyal, but there was a quiet fatigue in him too, a shared exhaustion that mirrored his handler. Marcus rested one gloved hand loosely against the dog's neck, not petting, not soothing, just contact. Grounding. Real. The chipped mug of coffee in his other hand had long gone cold. He hadn't noticed when. Inside the diner, warm light spilled through fogged-up windows, casting a golden contrast against the pale blue-gray of the snow outside. Laughter drifted faintly through the glass. Families, truckers, locals who belonged. Every now and then, a shadow moved past the window and paused just slightly, as if deciding whether to look out. Most didn't. The few who did quickly turned away. Marcus didn't blame them. To them, he looked like trouble. A drifter, a man who didn't fit. And maybe they weren't wrong. He flexed his fingers around the mug, noticing the faint tremor again. It wasn't from the cold. It never was. His jaw tightened slightly, and for a brief second, something flickered behind his eyes. Heat, sand, the distant crack of something breaking apart, but he shut it down before it could form. He had learned that lesson the hard way. You don't let it in. Not even a little. Shadow shifted slightly. Not restless, not uncomfortable. Alert. Marcus felt it before he saw it. The subtle change in the dog's body, the tightening of muscle, the slight lift of his head. Shadow's ears angled forward, his gaze locking onto something near the diner door. But he didn't bark. That was what made Marcus look up. Shadow didn't waste energy. He didn't react unless it mattered. Marcus straightened just slightly, instinct pulling him forward. His eyes followed the line of the dog's focus. The diner door opened with a soft chime. At first, it seemed like nothing unusual, just another customer stepping out into the cold. But then Marcus noticed the pace. Slow. Deliberate. A woman stepped onto the snow-covered concrete, pausing briefly as the wind brushed against her coat. She was small in stature, no taller than 5 feet, her frame thin but steady. Agnes Whitaker was 93 years old, though there was nothing fragile about the way she carried herself. Her white hair was neatly pulled back into a low bun, each strand in place despite the wind. Her face was lined with age, deep creases marking a lifetime of experiences, but her eyes, sharp, clear, and unwavering, held a quiet strength that didn't belong to someone nearing the end of life. She wore a long, dark wool coat, buttoned all the way up, and held a simple wooden cane in one hand, more as a companion than a necessity. She didn't look around nervously like most people did. She didn't hesitate. Her gaze moved across the parking lot, briefly scanning the empty spaces, the road, the falling snow, and then it landed on Marcus. And stayed there. Marcus felt it immediately. Most people looked away the moment their eyes met his. Not her. There was no fear in her expression, no judgment, just something steady, something recognizing. It made him shift slightly in his seat. He looked back down at his coffee, expecting her to move on. That's how it always went. People passed by, lives moved forward. He stayed where he was. But then he heard it. Tap. The soft, rhythmic sound of wood against pavement. Tap. Closer. Marcus frowned slightly, glancing up again. She was walking toward him. Not around him. Toward him. Shadow didn't move, but his eyes tracked her every step. Marcus straightened more this time, his instincts kicking in. His posture adjusted subtly, alert, controlled, ready if needed. His gaze sharpened, studying her movements, her hands, the angle of her shoulders. Nothing about her suggested threat. And yet, nothing about this made sense. People didn't approach him. They avoided him. That was the rule. She stopped just beside the empty chair across from him, resting both hands lightly on top of her cane for a brief moment. Snow settled softly on her coat, untouched. Her breathing was calm, steady. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice rough from disuse. "Ma'am, you might want to." He didn't finish, because she was already pulling out the chair and sitting down, just like that, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Marcus blinked, caught off guard in a way he hadn't been in a long time. His mind scrambled to catch up, instincts searching for explanation, for pattern, something that made sense of this moment. But there wasn't one. The parking lot remained still, the snow kept falling, the world didn't react. Neither did she. Agnes Whitaker simply sat there, hands folded gently over the top of her cane, her eyes resting on him with the same calm certainty as before. Marcus felt something unfamiliar press against his chest. Not fear, not anger, something else. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't know what to do next. The snow thickened, blurring the edges of the world, as if everything beyond the diner had stopped existing. Marcus Hale still hadn't moved when Agnes Whitaker settled fully into the chair across from him, her presence calm but immovable, like she had always intended to be there. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke, and the silence stretched, not awkward, not forced, but unfamiliar in a way that made Marcus uneasy. He wasn't used to sharing space with anyone, especially not like this. His instincts told him to end it quickly, keep it short, stay distant. But something about the way she simply sat there, unbothered, unafraid, disarmed him in a way confrontation never could. Shadow remained pressed against Marcus's leg, his amber eyes tracking Agnes carefully, not with aggression but with measured awareness. The dog's body language had shifted subtly. The tension was still there, but it wasn't defensive anymore. It was observational, like he was trying to understand her. That alone made Marcus pause. Shadow didn't lower his guard for strangers, not without reason. Agnes turned her head slightly toward the diner and raised one hand, her voice steady despite her age. "Excuse me, dear, could you bring 2 hot meals outside?" Her tone carried authority, not loud, not demanding, but certain. Inside the diner, a waitress paused mid-step near the counter, clearly caught off guard. Her name was Lily Carter, a woman in her early 30s with auburn hair tied loosely into a ponytail, strands falling around a tired but kind face. She had the look of someone who worked long shifts and carried quiet patience with her, the kind built from years of dealing with difficult customers without losing her composure. Her green eyes flickered between Agnes and Marcus, hesitation visible in the slight tightening of her jaw. People like Marcus usually meant trouble, or at least discomfort, and Lily had learned to read situations quickly. 2 meals? Lily repeated, her voice careful. "Yes, 2, Agnes replied, not looking back, as if there was nothing unusual about the request. Marcus finally reacted, shaking his head slightly, his voice low and rough. "No, I can't. I don't have money for that." Agnes didn't even glance at him. "Good thing I do." The simplicity of the answer cut off any further argument before it could form. Marcus exhaled slowly, running a hand across his face, the stubble scratching against his palm. Pride stirred in him, sharp and familiar, but weaker than it used to be. Pride had carried him through war, through nights he shouldn't have survived, through the slow unraveling of everything he once had. But out here, in the cold, with an empty stomach and a dog that depended on him, pride didn't hold the same weight. Inside, Lily hesitated for another second, then gave a small nod and disappeared into the kitchen. Marcus leaned back slightly, eyes drifting to the ground. "You don't even know me," he muttered. Agnes finally turned her gaze directly to him. "I know enough." He let out a quiet, humorless breath. "Yeah? What's that?" "I know what it looks like when someone hasn't eaten properly in days," she said. Marcus didn't respond, because she was right. The smell of food reached them before the plates did, carried by the warm air spilling out each time the diner door opened. It hit Marcus harder than he expected, his stomach tightening instantly, betraying him with a low, involuntary growl. His jaw clenched, embarrassment flashing across his face, and he looked away, as if ignoring it might make it disappear. A few minutes later, Lily returned, carefully balancing 2 plates, eggs, bacon, toast, something fried and steaming in the cold air. She stepped outside cautiously, her eyes still flicking toward Marcus, but there was less tension now, replaced by something closer to curiosity. She set the plates down on the table, one in front of Agnes, the other in front of Marcus. "There you go," she said softly, her voice gentler than before. Marcus stared at the plate without moving. "Go on," Agnes said, her tone quiet but firm. "Food won't fix everything, but it'll help you think straighter." He hesitated. For a moment, it looked like he might refuse again. Then, without a word, he reached forward and pushed the plate slightly to the side, not toward himself, toward Shadow. The dog didn't move immediately. He looked up at Marcus first, as if waiting for confirmation. Marcus gave the faintest nod. That was enough. Shadow lowered his head and began to eat, not greedily, not desperate, but steady, controlled, trained behavior overriding instinct. Still, the speed at which the food disappeared spoke louder than anything else. Agnes watched this quietly. She didn't smile. She didn't comment, but something in her expression softened. Marcus picked up his fork only after Shadow had taken several bites. Even then, his movements were slow, deliberate, like he wasn't fully comfortable accepting what was in front of him. The first bite hit him harder than expected, not because of the taste, but because of what it represented. Warmth, care, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. They ate in silence for a while, but it wasn't the same silence as before. "Marcus," he said eventually, his voice quieter now. "Marcus Hale." Agnes nodded once. "Agnes Whitaker." Another pause settled between them, but this time it felt lighter. "So," Agnes said after a moment, folding her hands again over her cane, "how does a man end up out here like this?" Marcus let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "That's not a short answer." "I've lived a long life," she replied. "I can spare the time." He studied her for a moment, something shifting behind his eyes. There was no pressure in her expression, no expectation, just patience. That made it harder to stay silent. "I was a Marine," he said finally. 2 tours. Agnes didn't interrupt. "That's where it started," he continued, his gaze drifting past her, somewhere far beyond the snow-covered parking lot. "Or maybe that's where it stopped, not sure anymore." His fingers tightened slightly around the fork. "You think you can handle it. You think you're built for it, and maybe you are, until you're not." A flicker crossed his face. "Stuff doesn't stay there," he added, tapping lightly against his temple. "It comes back with you, sounds, faces, things you can't turn off." His voice lowered. "Didn't sleep much. When I did, it wasn't rest." Agnes's grip on her cane tightened just slightly. "My wife tried," Marcus said, his jaw tightening. "She really did. But there's only so long someone can live with someone who isn't really there." He swallowed hard. "So she left." The words hung in the cold air. "And after that?" Agnes asked gently. Marcus gave a faint shrug. "Job didn't last. Turns out people don't like it when you snap." A humorless smile flickered. "Can't say I blame them." He leaned back, staring at the falling snow again. So I kept moving, easier that way. No one gets close. No one gets hurt. Agnes was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. My husband used to sit like you, she said. Marcus glanced at her, brow furrowing slightly. Like me. Alone, she clarified. Even when he wasn't. Something in Marcus's expression shifted. He came back from the war different, she continued. Didn't talk, didn't laugh, just sat there, like he was somewhere else. Marcus didn't say anything. He told me to leave, Agnes said. Marcus looked at her. Why? Because he thought I deserved better. Marcus let out a quiet breath. Sounds about right. Agnes leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. Do you know what I told him? Marcus hesitated, then shook his head. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried weight. Just because you're hurting doesn't mean you're not worth loving. The words hit him harder than anything else she had said. Marcus's jaw tightened. His gaze dropped to the table. Something pressed against his chest, tight, unfamiliar, dangerous in a different way than anything he faced before. He tried to push it down, but it didn't move. For the first time in years, he didn't know how to shut it off. Morning came slowly, the storm easing into a pale gray silence that stretched across the snow-covered streets of Flagstaff. Marcus Hale hadn't left. That alone felt wrong. He stood near the side of the diner, shoulders squared but slightly hunched against the cold, his breath visible in steady bursts. The habit had always been the same: arrive, stay just long enough, then disappear before anything could root him in place. But now, the truck sat untouched at the edge of the parking lot, its hood layered with fresh snow, and Marcus remained exactly where he had been the night before, as if something invisible had anchored him there. Shadow stood beside him, his posture more relaxed than it had been in days, though still alert. The dog's coat looked marginally better already, less rigid with cold, and there was a faint energy returning to the way he shifted his weight from paw to paw. His eyes tracked movement inside the diner, occasionally flicking back to Marcus, always checking, always present. Marcus flexed his fingers, rolling tension out of his joints. The tremor was still there, subtle but persistent, like a low hum beneath everything else. He glanced toward the diner door, watching as customers came and went, boots crunching softly in the snow. A part of him, old, ingrained, told him to leave before someone asked questions, before someone looked too closely. But another part, quieter, unfamiliar, held him in place. The door opened, and Lily Carter stepped out, balancing a metal trash bin against her hip. She looked more awake now than she had the night before, her auburn hair pulled tighter, her movements sharper, but the tiredness hadn't left her face. When she spotted Marcus still there, something like surprise flickered across her expression. "You're still here," she said, not unkindly. Marcus gave a small nod. "Yeah." Lily shifted the bin down onto the snow, studying him for a moment. "Most people don't stick around out here this long." "I'm not most people," Marcus replied, his tone flat but not defensive. She let out a quiet breath, glancing briefly at Shadow. "Your dog looks better already." Marcus followed her gaze. Shadow's ears twitched slightly at the attention, but he didn't move away. "He needed food," Marcus said simply. Lily hesitated, then tilted her head slightly. "You planning on staying?" The question hung there longer than it should have. Marcus looked toward the diner again, then back at the ground. "Maybe one more day." Even as he said it, the words felt strange. Lily nodded slowly, as if accepting something she didn't fully understand. "You could help out," she said after a moment. "Dishes, cleaning, stuff like that. Rick's not gonna like it, but—" she shrugged lightly. "Might be easier than sitting out here." Marcus's eyes flickered toward her. "I don't take handouts." "It's not a handout," she said quickly. "You work, you eat. Simple." Simple. He almost laughed at that. But he nodded instead. Inside, the warmth hit him the moment he stepped through the door, sharp against the cold that had settled into his bones. Conversations dipped slightly, not enough to stop, but enough to notice. A few heads turned, a few eyes lingered too long. Marcus ignored all of it. Shadow stayed close to his side, moving with quiet precision, his paws silent against the worn floor. Behind the counter stood Rick Dalton, the owner of the diner. He was a man in his early 50s, broad-shouldered with a thick neck and a permanent scowl carved into his face. His hair, once black, had faded into streaks of gray, cut short but uneven, and a heavy stubble covered his jaw like sandpaper. Rick had the kind of presence that filled a room, not with warmth, but with control. Years of running the diner had made him sharp, quick to judge, and slower to trust. His eyes were dark and calculating, the kind that measured people in seconds and rarely changed their opinion after that. Rick spotted Marcus immediately. His expression hardened. "No," he said before Marcus could even speak. Marcus didn't stop walking. Not asking for charity. Rick crossed his arms, stepping out from behind the counter. "Then what are you asking for?" "Work," Marcus replied. "Anything. In exchange for food." Rick let out a short, humorless laugh. "You think I just hand out jobs to every guy who walks in off the street looking like trouble?" Marcus met his gaze, steady. "I don't think anything. I'm offering." For a moment, neither of them moved. The tension stretched. Lily stepped in quietly. "He can wash dishes," she said. "We're behind anyway." Rick didn't look at her. His eyes stayed locked on Marcus. "You cause one problem," Rick said slowly. "You're out. You understand?" Marcus nodded once. "Understood." Rick jerked his head toward the back. "Kitchen's that way." The work was simple, and that made it harder. Marcus stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, hands moving methodically through stacks of plates and utensils. The rhythm was steady, rinse, scrub, stack, repetitive enough to quiet the noise in his head, at least for a while. He didn't rush. He didn't slow down. Every movement was controlled, precise, like muscle memory had taken over. But it didn't go unnoticed. A man at the counter, Tom Grady, leaned slightly toward Rick as he drank his coffee. Tom was in his mid-40s, with a thick build and a red, weather-beaten face that spoke of years working outdoors. His beard was patchy, his voice rough, and his opinions rarely filtered. "You really letting that guy stick around?" he muttered. "Looks like trouble waiting to happen." Rick didn't answer. Tom continued, louder this time. "Guys like that don't change." Marcus heard it. Of course he did. But he didn't react. Not outwardly. Inside, something tightened. Familiar. Sharp. The urge to respond, to shut it down, to prove something, it rose fast, instinctive. And then, it passed. Like a wave breaking against something solid. Marcus kept scrubbing. Shadow lay near the back door, watching everything. His posture had shifted again. Not tense, not wary, but attentive in a different way. When Agnes entered the diner later that morning, her step slow but steady, Shadow lifted his head, and his tail gave a faint, almost hesitant movement against the floor. Agnes noticed. Of course she did. "Well?" she said softly, her voice carrying just enough warmth to cut through the noise of the room. "That's an improvement." Marcus didn't turn, but something in his shoulders eased. Hours passed. Plates came and went. Conversations rose and fell. The world moved on around him. And Marcus stayed. He didn't leave when the whispers started. He didn't leave when the stares lingered. He didn't leave when it got uncomfortable. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he stayed where he was. The afternoon pressed heavy against the diner windows. The light outside dull and gray, as if the storm hadn't ended, only settled into something quieter, something that lingered. And inside, the air carried a tension that no one named, but everyone felt. Because Marcus Hale was still there, still moving between the sink and the counter with that same controlled precision. Shoulders squared, jaw tight, every motion deliberate, like he was holding something back with every breath. While Shadow lay near the back door with his head lifted, no longer curled into himself, but not fully relaxed either. His amber eyes tracking the room with quiet vigilance. His body stronger now, but his instincts unchanged, always watching, always ready. Rick Dalton stood behind the counter, arms crossed, his thick frame rigid, eyes narrowed as he followed Marcus's movements like a man waiting for proof he was right about someone. While Lily Carter moved between tables, her steps quick but her attention divided, glancing more often than she realized toward Marcus, as if she couldn't quite decide whether to trust the silence he carried or fear what it hid. And Agnes Whitaker sat at her usual table, small and composed, her posture steady despite her age, her white hair neat against the dim light, her calm presence the only thing in the room that didn't seem affected by the undercurrent building beneath everything else. The door slammed open with a force that didn't belong to the quiet rhythm of the diner, and cold air rushed in sharp and biting, carrying with it the smell of alcohol and something sour, something worn down, as Derek Collins stumbled inside, his boots dragging unevenly across the floor, his thick body leaning forward like he was fighting to stay upright, his face flushed red from both drink and cold, his thinning hair damp and clinging to his scalp, his patchy beard framing a mouth that twisted too easily into something unpleasant, while his eyes, glassy but still sharp enough to aim, moved across the room until they landed on Agnes with a slow, deliberate recognition that turned quickly into something darker. Rick stepped forward immediately, his voice low and controlled. "Not today, Derek." Derek laughed, a hollow, careless sound that cut through the room like something breaking. "Relax, Rick. I'm just here to eat." "You're here to start something," Rick replied, his tone tightening. Derek ignored him completely, drifting closer to Agnes's table, his focus narrowing as if nothing else existed, and Agnes didn't move, didn't shift, didn't react the way most people would when someone like him approached. She simply lifted her eyes to meet his with that same steady calm, and that calm seemed to irritate him more than anything else, because he leaned closer, his voice rising just enough to pull attention from every corner of the diner. "Well, look at this, still coming out here like nothing's changed." Agnes's voice came soft, even, unchanged. "Good afternoon, Derek." That was enough to set him off, because something in her tone denied him what he wanted: fear, reaction, control, and he slammed his hand down against the table, the sharp sound echoing through the room. "Don't do that," he snapped. "Don't act like you don't know what people say." Lily froze mid-step, a plate still in her hand, while Rick's shoulders tightened, his weight shifting forward, ready but uncertain, and Marcus, across the room, felt the change before he fully processed the words, the tension cutting through him like a familiar signal, something old waking up beneath the surface, his fingers tightening slowly around the edge of the counter, his breathing shifting, not faster, not louder, just heavier, controlled in a way that came from years of forcing chaos into order. "Say something," Derek pushed, leaning in closer. "Or is that what you do? Just sit there like you're better than everyone else?" Agnes didn't answer, and that silence broke something in him. He reached forward, not striking, not yet, but enough to cross a line that didn't need to be explained, and Marcus moved before the thought fully formed, his body reacting with the same precision it had been trained for, 2 steps, controlled, fast, his hand locking onto Derek's collar and pulling him upright with a force that erased the drunken sway instantly. The motion clean, efficient, undeniable, and the entire diner went silent in the same heartbeat. "Back off." The words came low, steady, but there was something under them that didn't belong in a quiet place. Derek's grin faltered, replaced by something uncertain, something close to fear, because Marcus didn't look like a man bluffing. He looked like a man who had already crossed lines worse than this and didn't need permission to do it again. And for a moment, Marcus wasn't fully there anymore, his eyes unfocused in a way that meant he was seeing something else, something louder, hotter, older, his grip tightening just slightly, enough to make Derek's breath catch. "Hey, easy, man," Derek muttered, his voice cracking as the bravado slipped. Marcus didn't respond. The world narrowed, sound dulled, the diner disappeared. There was only pressure, only control, only the instinct to end the threat in front of him before it became something worse. And everyone in the room felt it, even if they didn't understand it, because the air shifted into something sharp and fragile, something that could break with the smallest push, and Rick hesitated, unsure if stepping in would make it worse, while Lily stood frozen, her eyes wide, caught between fear and disbelief. Then Shadow moved, not fast, not aggressive, certain. He stepped forward and pressed his head gently against Marcus's leg, the contact light but deliberate, familiar in a way nothing else in that moment was. And that small action cut through everything, because Marcus's breath caught, just for a second, and that second was enough. The sound of the room returning first, then the cold, then the weight of the fabric in his hand, and he blinked as if waking up from something deeper than sleep, his grip loosening before he even realized he had made the decision. Marcus exhaled slowly, then let go. Derek stumbled backward, catching himself against the edge of a table, breathing hard, his eyes wide now, the arrogance gone, replaced by something he couldn't hide, while Marcus stepped back once, then again, creating space, not just from Derek, but from whatever he had almost become. his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm as control settled back into place, not perfect, but real. No one spoke immediately. The moment needed time to settle. Rick's shoulders dropped slightly, the tension easing just enough to show that something had shifted, while Lily moved again, slower now, more careful, and Agnes simply watched Marcus with that same quiet understanding, as if none of this had surprised her at all, as if she had expected exactly this line and exactly this choice. Marcus didn't look at anyone, but he felt it, the way the room saw him now. Not as a threat, not as something to avoid, but as someone who had stood at the edge and chosen not to fall. The storm had passed, but the cold remained, settling deep into the town like something that refused to leave. And for the first time in years, Marcus Hale didn't move on with it. He stayed. Not because he had nowhere else to go, but because something had shifted inside him, something small but stubborn that refused to let him disappear again. And that change revealed itself not in words, but in action. In the way he showed up early before the diner opened, clearing snow from the walkway without being asked. In the way he checked the hinges on the back door when it creaked. In the way he noticed things that needed fixing and quietly fixed them. As if discipline had finally found a place to land instead of something to fight against. Shadow followed him everywhere, stronger now, his coat gradually regaining its healthy sheen, his ribs no longer as sharply visible, his movements more confident, but his eyes still carried that same awareness, always scanning, always grounding Marcus without needing to be told. And when Agnes Whitaker stepped out one morning, wrapped in her dark coat, her cane tapping lightly against the frozen pavement, Shadow approached her first without hesitation, his posture calm, his tail moving once in a slow, measured arc that spoke of trust earned rather than given. Marcus noticed the way Agnes's house sat on the edge of town when he first drove her back after a routine checkup. A small, aging structure with peeling paint and a porch that leaned slightly to one side. Not abandoned, but not cared for the way it should have been. And inside, the warmth was modest, the furniture simple and worn. Everything clean but clearly maintained by someone who had more will than resources. And it didn't take Marcus long to understand that Agnes lived alone, truly alone. Not in the quiet independence she presented to the world, but in the kind of solitude that came when life slowly took people away and never replaced them. He didn't say anything about it, didn't ask questions. He just started showing up, fixing what needed fixing, reinforcing the porch, sealing cracks in the windows, checking the heating system with the same focused attention he had once given to equipment that determined whether people lived or died. And Agnes never stopped him, never thanked him in a way that made it feel like charity. She simply accepted it with a quiet nod, as if she understood exactly what he was doing and why it mattered. Back at the diner, Rick Dalton watched all of this without commenting at first, his skepticism not gone, but slowly worn down by consistency. Because Marcus didn't argue, didn't demand, didn't prove anything with words. He just worked, day after day, with the same steady rhythm. And that kind of persistence was harder to dismiss than any apology or explanation. Until one afternoon, as Marcus wiped down the counter, Rick stepped beside him, his voice lower than usual, less guarded. "You planning on sticking around?" Marcus paused for a second, just long enough to acknowledge the weight of the question, then continued wiping. "I don't know." Rick nodded once, as if that answer meant more than a confident yes ever could. "I got a spot open," he said after a moment. "Regular hours. Pay's not great, but it's steady." Marcus didn't respond immediately, and Rick didn't push. He just walked away like the offer had already been made and didn't need to be repeated. That night, the call came. Marcus sat in the truck, engine off, the quiet pressing in around him, when the old phone in his hand buzzed against his palm, the screen lighting up with a name he hadn't seen in years. Daniel Reeves, former gunnery sergeant, a man who had once been everything Marcus trusted in a leader. Reeves was older now, mid-40s, with a voice that always carried calm authority, the kind that steadied people even in chaos. A man known for bringing his team home no matter the cost, but also a man who had watched too many of them not make it back, and that weight lived in every pause between his words. Marcus stared at the name longer than he should have, then answered, "Hale." There was a brief silence on the other end, followed by a breath that sounded almost like relief. "Didn't think you'd pick up." Marcus leaned back slightly, his eyes closing for a second. "Didn't think you'd call." Reeves gave a quiet exhale. "Got something for you. Security contract, private sector, good pay, stable work, thought of you." Marcus didn't answer right away, and Reeves didn't rush him. because he knew better than most that decisions like this weren't about opportunity. They were about whether a man believed he deserved one. "You still there?" Reeves asked. "Yeah." "You in or out?" Marcus looked through the windshield at the diner, at the light spilling onto the snow, at the faint outline of shadow moving inside, and something tightened in his chest. Not fear, not resistance, something else, something that hadn't been there before. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all I'm asking," Reeves replied, and the line went quiet. The next morning, Marcus found Agnes already seated at her usual table, her posture the same, her presence unchanged, as if she had always been there and always would be. And when he sat across from her, the words came out before he could overthink them. "I might be leaving." Agnes studied him for a moment, her expression calm, but there was something deeper in her eyes, something that measured not the decision, but the man making it. "Then you should," she said. Marcus frowned slightly. "That's it?" She tilted her head just enough to hold his gaze. "You don't owe me your life, Marcus." The words landed heavier than anything else she had said before, not because they pushed him away, but because they removed the last excuse he had to stay for the wrong reasons. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Then he nodded. The decision didn't feel like running. For the first time, it felt like moving forward. On his last day in Flagstaff, Marcus stood outside the diner again, the same spot where everything had started. But nothing about it felt the same, and Shadow stood beside him, stronger, steady, his presence no longer just survival, but something more grounded, something whole. And as Marcus reached for the door, he paused, his attention caught by a figure sitting alone at one of the outdoor tables. A man in his early 30s, broad-shouldered but slouched, his clothes clean but worn, his eyes fixed on nothing, the kind of stillness that didn't come from peace, but from being lost somewhere you couldn't explain. Shadow moved first. He walked toward the man slowly, not cautious, not aggressive, just certain, and stopped a few feet away, watching him the same way he had once watched everything else. And the man looked up, startled at first, then confused, then something softer, something that hadn't been there a second ago. Marcus followed. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think. He pulled out the chair across from the man and sat down, his posture calm, steady, familiar in a way that felt like coming full circle, and for a brief moment, he saw himself exactly where that man was. The same emptiness, the same distance, the same quiet that meant something was broken but not beyond repair. Marcus rested his hands on the table, not reaching, not forcing, just there. And this time, he didn't look away. Sometimes miracles don't come as thunder or light from the sky. They arrive quietly, in the form of a stranger who chooses to sit beside you, when the rest of the world walks away. In moments like that, it is not coincidence, it is grace. It is God working through ordinary people to reach the places in us we thought were beyond saving. Marcus didn't need a miracle to erase his past. He needed one to remind him he was still worthy of a future. And sometimes that's how God moves in our lives, not by changing everything at once, but by placing the right person in front of us at the exact moment we are ready to stop running. In our everyday lives, we pass by people who are fighting battles we cannot see. A kind word, a moment of patience, or simply choosing not to look away could be the very thing that changes someone's life. You never know when God is calling you to be that moment for someone else. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories of strength, healing, and quiet miracles. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and bring light into the places you need it most.